The Zorthan Dominion had long viewed humanity as a curiosity, a newly emerged species barely a few centuries into spaceflight, still clinging to emotional ideals and chaotic politics. When the Galactic Concord ordered peaceful diplomatic relations with Earth, Admiral Virex Volgar of the Zorthan High Command begrudgingly accepted the assignment, believing it a waste of time. His fleet, famous for subjugating 3 minor empires, had no need to understand a species whose greatest technological achievements looked like toys. Upon arrival at Earth's orbital diplomacy station, Virex was unimpressed. Where Zorthan, cruisers were sharp, ominous symbols of control. The human station was filled with color, laughter, and, most confusingly, children. As part of the diplomatic tour, Earth's ambassador invited Virex to observe a training session at the United Terran Academy, where children learned science, engineering, and rudimentary command theory through something called the Stellar Simulator. The room was a circular amphitheater, with pods housing young cadets seated in command chairs. Each pod projected holograms of ships, fleet positions, and galactic maps. At first glance, it looked like a child's entertainment center. Virex sneered. "This is how you train for war? With playtime?" A soft chuckle came from the human ambassador, who gestured toward one of the simulator pods. Inside sat a child, perhaps 11 or 12, focused with eerie calm. "That's Cadet Kale Varn, top of his class. He's running a high-level simulation based on a Zorthan border skirmish." Virex bristled. "Based on our tactics?" "Yes. Our analysts feed real battle data into the simulator AI. The children adapt and learn to overcome." Amused by the suggestion that a child could grasp the intricacies of Zorthan battle doctrine, Virex decided to observe more closely. He accessed the simulation's interface and saw Kale leading a small Terran strike force against a superior alien fleet mimicking Zorthan cruisers, complete with accurate weapon arcs, formation signatures, and shield delay timings. Rather than fight head-on, Kale split his fleet into misdirection patterns, baiting the larger force into bottlenecks. He used radiation bursts to blind sensors, vented plasma to mimic ship explosions, and even sacrificed decoy drones to feign retreat. In 10 minutes, the simulated Zorthan fleet was decimated. Clean, brutal efficiency. Virex's amusement soured. "That tactic Sector H9 feint that's from the Jarrex campaign," he growled. "That data is classified." The ambassador smiled just slightly. "Not anymore. Our sensor net along the border picked it up last cycle. The children have been training against it ever since." Virex turned to study Kale again. The boy wasn't cheering or boasting. He wasn't playing. His expression was cold, calculating, focused. There was no thrill in his success, only quiet analysis as the simulation reset for another round. The Admiral leaned back unsettled. He had arrived expecting to mock. Instead, he'd glimpsed a generation being sharpened beneath his notice, through what the humans simply called a game. Unbeknownst to Virex, this was only the beginning. Admiral Virex Volgar left the simulator room with a sour expression and a tightening coil of doubt in his chest. He was no stranger to battle, and yet something about that child, Kyle Varn, had disturbed him. The tactics the boy used weren't random, they weren't flukes. They were learned, calculated, and specifically tailored to counter Zorthan doctrine. Trying to shake off the unease, Virex requested a private session with the simulator interface. Earth's ambassador agreed, perhaps too readily. A new scenario was prepared in one of the advanced holopods, where Virex would go head-to-head with Kale in real time. The Admiral welcomed the opportunity. He would teach this human child humility. Inside the pod, Kale was already seated, serious, silent, and composed. The simulator room darkened, holographic stars igniting all around them. Virex selected the composition of his fleet: 5 heavy cruisers, escort ships, and 2 carriers, based on real Zorthan assets. Kale was given a lightly armed Terran scout fleet with fewer ships and older models. The battle began. Virex launched a standard pincer formation, aiming to corral Kale's fleet into a central kill zone. But Kale scattered his ships like dust, not in panic but in strategy. His vessels used gravitational slingshot maneuvers around asteroids, deployed ECM clouds at key angles and pinged fake sensor echoes that confused Virex's targeting systems. The Admiral frowned. How does a child know how to counter sensor triangulation? Then Kale did something audacious. He sent one of his scout ships directly into the center of Virex's formation. It exploded prematurely, releasing an ion pulse that crippled the central command node of the Admiral's fleet. Temporarily blinded and disorganized, Virex's forces were picked apart from the flanks. Virex cursed in his native tongue. Kale wasn't reacting to his moves. He was predicting them. Traps were already laid before Virex had committed to the action. When the final cruiser fell, the simulator flashed the words, "Simulation complete. Human victory." The pod lights rose. Slowly, Kale looked over at the Admiral, his voice calm. "That was fun. Want to run it again?" Virex said nothing for a long moment. The Zorthan officers who had gathered to watch stood in stunned silence. This wasn't just a child with a knack for strategy. This was a living countermeasure to their fleet doctrine. It was as if Kale had studied them for years. The ambassador stepped forward, folding his arms with polite restraint. "We've run thousands of simulations like these. Children learn by failing against real-world tactics, and they improve very quickly. But those were real formations," Virex muttered. "The timing, the feints, that was textbook fleet logic. Which is why your textbook needs rewriting," the ambassador replied. The Admiral realized for the first time, in his long career, that he had underestimated a species not because of their weakness but because of their youth. And worse, Earth wasn't training soldiers in secret bases or war colleges. They were training them in classrooms under the guise of education and games. Kyle stood, gave a small, respectful nod, and left the simulator quietly. Virex stared at the now dark holograms, his mind racing. If one human child could dismantle a top-tier battle formation, what else was Earth hiding behind its seemingly innocent smiles? Admiral Virex's pride had been rattled, but his military instincts were now fully awake. He'd been defeated in simulation by a human child using tactics that shouldn't have been accessible, let alone mastered. There had to be a flaw, a trick, some kind of human deception layered into the simulator. No child could read the flow of interstellar warfare with such clarity, unless someone had handed it to him. Demanding answers, Virex requested access to the stellar simulator's code and learning framework. The Earth ambassador, Ambassador Morella Rain, agreed without hesitation. That alone unsettled the Admiral. No species gave up military training protocols so freely unless they had no fear of them being understood. Inside the Academy's Data Intelligence Core, Virex was shown the simulator's architecture. Its heart was a quantum learning neural net developed over the last 40 years. The core AI wasn't static. It evolved with every simulation, every decision made by the students. The more children failed, the smarter the system became. And the more it learned, the more they all did. "We didn't design it for war," Ambassador Rain explained, watching the Admiral pace the interface chamber. "Originally, the simulator was just a teaching tool for navigation and resource strategy. But then we fed it a few public military recordings from outer system skirmishes. The AI began identifying patterns, predicting outcomes." Virex squinted at the cascading data streams. "These formations, you've recreated Zorthan, Volgari, and even Keltari maneuvers. Many of them are still considered classified." "They were," Rain replied smoothly, "until we intercepted transmissions, battlefield scans, or recovered drone debris. Humans are persistent. We don't just observe, we adapt." Virex felt a cold pressure in his chest. The data sets scrolling in front of him weren't based on Earth military exercises. They were pulled from real conflicts across the galaxy. Somehow, Earth had amassed a vast library of alien tactics and fed them into their children's toys. And those toys were teaching future generations how to dismantle empires. "How long have your students been using these simulations?" Virex asked quietly. Rain didn't hesitate. "First version launched 32 years ago. The current AI generation has seen over 9 million simulations, updated daily." Every child here begins using it by age 7. Virex staggered mentally at the implications. That meant Earth had potentially millions of youths trained, not in theoretical warfare, but in practical counter-warfare. They weren't taught Earth strategies. They were being taught how to tear apart every other species' strategies, as if humanity had decided that the best defense wasn't building a stronger army, it was understanding everyone else's. And no one noticed, he muttered aloud. Everyone underestimated us, Rain said, gently but firmly. You assumed we were behind, but we were simply watching, learning, playing the long game. The Admiral's eyes flicked to a paused simulation screen. Kale Varn's scenario still frozen in mid-battle. The boy had isolated a Zorthan carrier and outflanked its escorts before the Admiral's simulated command ship could react. A textbook dissection. It hit him then. This wasn't just Earth's future. This was a warning. Humanity didn't need a war fleet. They were building generations of minds sharper than any blade, and the galaxy wasn't ready for what those minds could become. Admiral Virex's unsettling discoveries about Earth's game had barely settled when the situation escalated far beyond simulations. The Zorthan Dominion was a vast empire, and not all commanders were patient with diplomacy. When word reached Virex of a rogue Zorthan fleet preparing a sudden assault on Earth's distant colony, the Admiral found himself in the middle of a crisis he had not anticipated. The colony, called New Dawn, was a small mining outpost on the edge of Terran space, largely undefended, staffed mostly by civilian engineers and scientists. Earth had always maintained a low military profile here, relying on diplomacy and hope rather than fleets. But the rogue Zorthan commander, seeing Earth as vulnerable, intended to make a statement with a swift strike. On Earth, news of the incoming attack spread quickly. Military personnel were scarce, and traditional forces were days away from mobilization. In this desperate moment, the unlikeliest hero stepped forward. Kale Varn, the child strategist Virex had first scoffed at. Using the same stellar simulator interface that had impressed and unsettled the alien Admiral, Kale was plugged directly into New Dawn's drone fleets and defense satellites. Earth's defense systems had been designed with modular AI control that, in emergencies, could link with the simulator network for real-time human command. What had been a game now became the real battlefield. Kale's fingers flew over the holographic controls, commanding swarms of drones to form defensive rings, intercept incoming missiles, and launch precision strikes against the Zorthan fleet's vulnerable points. The simulations he had mastered years ago transformed into life-or-death maneuvers. The rogue fleet launched its attack with brutal efficiency. Heavy plasma cannons lit up the sky, and massive cruisers advanced in formation. But Kale's defense was swift and unpredictable. Using guerrilla tactics adapted from his simulations, he deployed decoy drones, created sensor jamming fields, and used the asteroid belts near New Dawn to funnel enemy ships into ambushes. Despite their overwhelming firepower, the Zorthans found themselves outmaneuvered. Their targeting systems were confused by constant false signals, their formations broken by hit-and-run strikes that seemed choreographed like a deadly dance. Every tactic they tried was met with a counter, every advance neutralized. Virex, monitoring the battle remotely, was forced to confront a reality he had mocked only days before. A child was orchestrating a flawless defense that rivaled the strategies of veteran commanders. The Zorthan fleet took heavy losses. Several ships were crippled or destroyed, and the fleet was forced into a retreat, its morale shattered by the unexpected resistance. The battle ended not with a glorious conquest, but with a humiliating withdrawal. Back on Earth, the celebrations were muted but genuine. Kale had saved New Dawn not through brute force or overwhelming numbers, but through intellect, creativity, and the very game that had been dismissed by an entire alien empire. The implications were staggering. If a child, armed only with a simulator interface and civilian defense tech, could repel an elite Zorthan fleet, what did that say about Earth's hidden strength? How many others like Kale were preparing behind the scenes? For Admiral Virex, the scales had fallen from his eyes. He realized the galaxy had underestimated not just humanity's technology, but the ingenuity bred into its youngest minds. This was not a species to dismiss lightly. They had turned games into deadly training grounds and children into commanders. And the war for Earth's future had only just begun. The humiliating defeat of the rogue Zorthan fleet at New Dawn shook the Dominion's leadership to its core. Admiral Virex Volgar, once a proud symbol of Zorthan military might, found himself under intense scrutiny. His skepticism about Earth's child's game had backfired spectacularly, and now the Galactic High Command demanded answers. Virex was summoned back to the Dominion's capital, where he faced a tribunal of the Empire's most hardened commanders. They questioned him relentlessly. How could a child armed with mere simulators and civilian tech outmaneuver and defeat trained Zorthan fleets? What secrets had Earth been hiding? Was this a new form of warfare? Virex confessed everything he had learned. The simulator's adaptive AI, the vast database of alien tactics fed to children from a young age, and the ruthless efficiency of Earth's games turned real. The tribunal members scoffed initially but grew silent as Virex detailed the simulation battle and the real engagement at New Dawn. Meanwhile, Earth did not rest on its laurels. Kyle Varn was fast becoming a symbol, a beacon of what humanity could achieve through intelligence, adaptability, and a refusal to be underestimated. The stellar simulator network expanded rapidly, incorporating feedback from real battles, further sharpening the minds of future generations. Back in the Dominion, Virex realized the true scope of the threat. Earth wasn't just building ships or weapons. It was building a generation of strategic thinkers trained to exploit every weakness in traditional military doctrine. The Dominion's centuries-old confidence in brute force and rigid hierarchy was being shattered by a species that thrived on unpredictability and innovation. Determined to learn more, Virex requested direct access to the simulator's latest data and sought a meeting with Kale himself. His initial contempt had transformed into respect tinged with unease. He needed to understand this new form of warfare if the Zorthan Dominion hoped to survive the coming conflicts. The meeting was arranged on neutral ground, an orbital station orbiting a distant gas giant. Virex entered the room alone, greeted, not by a hardened general but by a young boy with steady eyes and a calm demeanor. "Cadet Varn," Virex began, struggling to mask his tension. "I must admit, I misjudged you, and your people." Kyle nodded, his voice measured. "You're not the first to underestimate us, Admiral. But it's not just me, it's every child trained with the simulator. We learn from every encounter, every mistake, every victory." You, Admiral asked pointed questions about Earth's philosophy. Was this all just survival? Or was there a deeper strategy at play? Kyle's answer was simple, yet chilling. Survival through understanding. War is a game of minds, not just machines. If you can think faster, adapt quicker, and outsmart your enemy before the first shot is fired, you win. Virex left the meeting with a heavy heart. The child was not merely playing a game. He was a glimpse into the future of warfare, where intellect and innovation would outpace sheer firepower. Back in the Dominion's war room, Virex prepared his reports and recommendations. The Zorthan military must evolve or face extinction. They needed to embrace unpredictability, nurture creativity, and discard their rigid doctrines. But old empires resist change. The question remained, could the Zorthan Dominion adapt fast enough before Earth's game turned deadly real on a galactic scale? The tension in the galaxy had reached a breaking point. Admiral Virex Volgar's warnings about humanity's hidden strength were finally taken seriously. Too late for many. Earth, once dismissed as a backwater world of insignificant players, had revealed itself as a crucible forging a new breed of warriors. Children trained from birth in the lethal art of war through seemingly innocent games. The Zorthan Dominion, along with several other galactic powers, scrambled to prepare for what they now understood was not just a military threat, but a paradigm shift in warfare. Traditional fleets and tactics were becoming obsolete against the unpredictable, adaptive strategies bred by Earth's simulators. Kale Varn had become more than a child prodigy. He was the symbol of Earth's rising power, a living testament to a new era. When the final conflict erupted, it wasn't a massive armada of massive warships meeting in grand battles. It was a war fought in shadows and speed, intelligence and innovation. The opening salvo came unexpectedly. Earth's fleet, small but agile, struck first at a critical supply station in the Outer Rim controlled by the Vulgari Empire. Using tactics, perfected in simulations, they bypassed main defenses, infiltrated with drone swarms, and neutralized key command nodes before the enemy could mount a response. Sorthan commanders watched helplessly as their battle lines fractured under assaults that were unpredictable and rapid. Their centuries-old formations dismantled by swarms of tiny craft, controlled by humans who thought like chess masters rather than soldiers. Admiral Virex, now commander of a joint fleet tasked with countering Earth's advance, found himself forced into reactive maneuvers. Every time he anticipated an Earth move, they had already adapted and countered. The humans' ability to learn from each encounter, update their strategies instantly, and execute flawlessly made them a nightmare opponent. Kale, no longer a child but a young adult, directed these operations from a mobile command platform. His strategies combined simulation tactics with real-time data feeds, coordinating strikes that seemed to anticipate enemy moves before they happened. To the galaxy, he was a genius. To his enemies, a ghost. But Earth's war was not just fought with ships and weapons. It was fought in minds. Earth's children, raised on simulations and games, had developed a culture of creative problem-solving, risk-taking, and lateral thinking. They innovated new technologies, hacking enemy systems, disrupting communications, and turning their opponents' own weapons against them. Virex reflected bitterly on the day he first laughed at Kale's game. He realized that this child's game was a crucible, forging the deadliest commanders in galactic history. The galaxy's old powers, with their rigid hierarchies and traditions, were no match for the fluid adaptability of Earth's new warriors. The war ended not with a single decisive battle, but with a gradual tipping of the balance. One by one, Earth's adversaries capitulated or sought peace, unable to keep up with the relentless human advance. Earth's secret weapon was not firepower, but minds sharpened in games that had once seemed harmless. Admiral Virex, now a reluctant ally, acknowledged this truth publicly. We laughed at a child's game. We underestimated a species who saw war not as destruction but as a puzzle to solve. That was our greatest mistake. The galaxy would never forget the lesson. Never underestimate the power of a child's game, because sometimes it is deadly serious.